I am here with my new friend, John Aziz, who is a British Palestinian, and we are going to have a lively debate about Israel-Palestine. There he is. You can see him in the top left. So, hi. Yeah, just introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you.
Hi, hello. My name is John Aziz. I'm a British Palestinian peace activist. I've recently had a piece in the Atlantic magazine. Talking about my opinions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I would define myself as a peace activist and not as a Palestinian Zionist, as Empanada maybe suggested on Twitter earlier. But I'm certainly someone who tries to understand the history of Zionism and how to take that into account in terms of building a peaceful two-state solution.
Okay, so as I said before, maybe these are points that we can touch on later on. Okay, but back to what I just said. So, and I'll read it again just because later I'm going to edit out that embarrassing intro. Otherwise, everyone will just stop watching the VOD of this
Don't
in
worry.
the first 5 minutes.
These things happen.
So, you posted a tweet today, which is what led to you challenging me to this debate, where you said, in quotes, "I don't hate Jews, I just hate the country where 50% of Jews in the world live and the ideology that that country should exist, which 80 to 90% of Jews in the world support, and red flags." Obviously, that's something that you think, if someone thinks that it's bad. So, just, again, could you basically say what you just said already, and then
Right.
we can...
So what I would say is that I'm not saying that criticism of Israel is wrong. I'm not saying criticism of Netanyahu or the Quds wrong. I'm not saying criticism of the war between Israel and Hamas is wrong. I'm saying that people who are completely opposed to any Jewish state or any Jewish existence in that region are wrong, and they're propagating anti-Semitic ideas. And there are a lot of Jewish people, worldwide who do support Zionism, the vast majority, and that's why. Because when people are saying that, the opinion of all Jewish people is, or the vast majority of Jewish people is, untenable and something that must be destroyed, something that must be dismantled, I don't think that that's reasonable. I don't think that that's a way to create a peaceful solution between Israelis and Palestinians where we can live together in peace without blowing each other up and killing each other.
Okay, so first question, I'd like to establish the facts on this first. Do you have a source for this 80 to 90% claim?
Bear with me. Let me just get it up, because I think I was being pretty conservative.
Okay.
A lot of my followers were saying it was more like 90, 95. I think my here we go. Brookings Institution is one poll. I've seen many polls in the past. So I'm gonna actually link you to a Jewish Currents article where they were discussing the claim that 95%. Again, I went a little bit lower because I was trying to be conservative.
Okay, let's check.
It was looking at Barry Weiss's claim that 95% of Jewish people support the Jewish state.
Okay. So,
and according to this, the statistic originates from an August 2019 article by Gallup senior scientist Frank Newport in response to Donald Trump's controversial comments about American Jewish Democrats being disloyal to Israel. Newport set out to examine Jews' political views. Drawing on polling data from Gallup and other organizations, he contended that Jews generally have more favorable views of Israel than the broader American public, but nonetheless concluded that Trump's actions in support of Israel to date have done little to shift Jews' political allegiance. To support the former point, he included an estimate that 95% of Jews have favorable views of Israel. Presumably that would be referring to American Jews, but
yeah.
we can. I think we could probably safely say that the vast majority of Israeli Jews are also in favor of the existence of Israel.
Sure, but I don't think, for one, American Jews, I'm not sure which poll this comes from. Let's say Gallup. Gallup, obviously isn't like the ADL or some other biased organization, so I'd be happy to accept that sort of poll. But let's see if this poll actually exists, for one, and for two, this is only Americans.
I was estimating. Estimating
Hold on.
those numbers.
So there is a very interesting caveat in this article, which is that the poll that this data is based on comes from a sample of only 128 Jewish by religion respondents over 5 years. So 95% clearly probably a bit of an inflation. But
I would probably agree with you. 95% is maybe more than the reality, but I think maybe 80 to 90% is a pretty reasonable guesstimate.
Okay, so I'm happy to go with the 80%, even though I've never seen anything even remotely indicating that. This article is basically what this article is saying, that it's very hard to find data on this. So there is one fairly decent poll included in here from a Pew survey in 2013 of American Jews, which found that 69% of American Jews were somewhat or very emotionally attached to Israel, while 31% were not very. 31% in total were not very or not attached at all. So
87% of American Jews said that caring about Israel is either essential or at least important to what being Jewish means to them. So there's your 80 to 90%.
It's kind of weird though, because you have, in the same survey, you have a question that are you emotionally attached to Israel? And only 65% answered yes. And then in the same survey, you get caring about Israel essential or important to what being Jewish means to you? And 89%. For me, those are basically the same question, and you get two totally different results.
I have a theory on that discrepancy, and I think that maybe the lower number for one is to do with people's legitimate concerns and disagreements about the Netanyahu government and frustration with maybe what Israel has turned into politically over the years.
Well,
I'm shooting from the hip there.
You can't really get any sort of smoking guns sort of percentage out of this. So we can just say 80%. That's fine. So if we say that the reason why it's wrong to be against the existence of Israel is because 80% of Jews support it, that's simply an argument, an appeal to popularity. I don't think it's the best argument I've ever heard in my life. You could apply that to many other situations, for example, like Nazi Germany. What's your response to that?
I think that Nazi Germany. Hitler never won more than 43% of the vote in a fair election in Nazi Germany. The Nazis seized power, didn't they?
Sure, but Israel never won 50% of the vote of global Jewry either. And I also don't see why this matters, because Hitler won that percentage of the vote very, very early. What was it, 1933, I believe? And then he had
33, yeah.
And then he had like six years until the beginning of the war, and another 2 years until the industrial Holocaust began. So you have a lot of time there for other for other Germans to, start supporting Hitler, especially given that a lot of the anti-Hitler vote went to, say, National Conservatives and other such right-wing factions. Or, it's a lot of time, and we also know in Germany a lot of socialists became Nazis basically later on. So I don't think looking at that and then saying, well, less than 50% of Germans supported the Nazis is a really good response. And also, regardless of that, we can make a hypothetical, even if it wasn't true. Would it have been okay? Would it have been anti-German to be against the existence of Nazi Germany if 80% of Germans had supported it? I would say no.
I mean, Nazi Germany destroyed itself through expansionism and through starting World War II. So I would say the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Nazi Germany was such a violent ideological invention that it destroyed itself.
Okay. And I don't really see how that changes anything though, because what we're talking about here is the argument that if it's popular, if among the group of people who it's for, that makes it okay. I don't really see what would matter about how it actually turned out, because all we're making here is an argument from popularity.
Right. I mean, my views on why Palestinians should ultimately, it's going to be very difficult, but they should ultimately make peace with Israel, is because Israel and Zionism were inevitable conclusion of Jewish people being pogromed for over 1,000 years in diaspora living. And it was inevitable that Jewish people were going to band together for self-defense against pogroms. And that's what we saw with the Dreyfus Affair in the origins of Zionism.
I don't see the relevance to the question here, because what you said is that it's wrong to be against, what you said specifically, it's wrong to be against the existence of the state of Israel because 80% of Jews support it. And you're going off on this sort of tangent here that is really just not related to that question. So what I'm asking you is, how is it anti-Semitic to be against Israel in spite of the fact that 80% of Jews at least support the existence of Israel? But it's not anti-German to be against the existence of Nazi Germany when easily 80% of Germans supported that.
Well, let's look at what the consequences of dismantling the state of Israel would be.
Totally irrelevant, though. This is totally
not irrelevant.
Because the consequence of dismantling the state of Israel, this is all some sort of future hypothetical where you're going to go over like this sort of nightmare scenario that you've concocted in your head of a reverse genocide, something that colonists in the past have.
I mean, that's what Hamas calls for, right?
It's not what Hamas.
That's what Hamas calls for.
It's not what Hamas calls for. Not since 2017, since they changed that charter, and in their original charter,
the stones and trees
in the first place. So
the stones and trees will cry out.
First thing here, okay, you're assuming that there's only one possible outcome. The fact of the matter is there's already one state in Palestine. It's called Israel. Israel occupies the West Bank. Israel de facto occupies Gaza. Right now it does.
Now they do.
Outside, and before that, they basically, according to every single international humanitarian organization, what they did in Gaza was basically an occupation just without boots on the ground within Gaza, because they control its borders, they control who gets in and out, they control what gets in and out, etc., etc. And they also periodically attacked it. So
back and forth.
If we already have one state,
the rockets.
Great, but if we already have one state right now, which is obviously not a good state, how could this one state not change to the point where it is basically unrecognizable and it's basically not the same state anymore? And calling it, Israel as Israel has existed before this, because Israel, since its founding, has pretty much always been like this. There's never been a point where it hasn't been like this. So how would that not be possible? How do we need there to be nothing but a massacre of Jews when we already have one state, and all that really needs to change is to take this one state and make it not a state where one group of people holds such massive power over the other?
I'm talking about the views of groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and their political goals in dismantling the state of Israel and implementing an Islamic theocracy where Jewish people will be subjugated.
Let's say that Hamas and Islamic Jihad really want to do this. Let's get any sort of factual argument out of the way. Why would they want to do that? Were they born anti-Semitic?
I think part of it's ideological. I think they're theocratic. I think to some extent Palestinians are radicalized by the situation. And I as a Palestinian myself, I've seen this. I know this. Right? Palestinians are probably one of the most oppressed groups of people in the world, and of course, oppressed people are easy to radicalize.
Okay.
And that's why I want to solve the situation so people stop getting radicalized.
So one point, ideologies don't spawn out of a vacuum. They come from situations. If these people in Palestine find Islamic fundamentalism appealing to them, there has to be a reason for it. And I think that reason is certainly the oppression that they have faced. There is certainly a reason why the secular organizations in Palestine have gradually lost influence and power, while organizations have like Hamas and Islamic Jihad have only gotten stronger. And that's because the situation has not gotten better. So you have people turning to these sorts of ideologies, whatever. But in a situation like this, where we can both agree, you at least somewhat, me pretty much, I think it's all of the reason, that these sorts of organizations, these sorts of belief, this hatred basically, is bred from the situation, from the oppression. How is the onus not on Israel to stop the oppression, to make this hatred dissipate? Why is the onus on the Palestinians to do it?
Well, speaking as a Palestinian, I tend to be far more critical of my own side because I'm in a position to do that. I respect incredibly Israeli peace activists who are critical of Netanyahu, who are critical of the basic law, which is, anti-Palestinian, who are critical of Likud, who are critical of mistreatment of Palestinians, who are critical of the occupation, who are critical of the settlements, who are critical of administrative detention, all of our legitimate grievances. I appreciate is my friends in the Israeli peace movement who will stand up against that. But for me, I have a niche. I'm developing a niche of being a Palestinian who will criticize on our side as well. Okay. And of course, all of the things that I mentioned, I'm against in terms of,
I'm sorry, but this entire idea, for one, you didn't answer my actual question there. I'd like you to just tell me here, which side has most of the onus on dissipating the hatred between the two sides? Is it Israel or Palestine? Who has the power here? Who has caused most of this hatred?
The way I'm an individualist and the way I think about it,
I don't care about how you think about it. I'm telling you, as like a factual assessment of your assessment of the history of the facts on the ground, which side is the side that has caused the hatred most between these two sides?
I'm sorry to prevaricate on your question, because I appreciate that we're having a good conversation, right? But I feel like I have to answer this the way I want to answer it, because that's my truthful answer in my heart, and I perceive this.
I think you can't say it. I think you know that. I think you know that what I'm saying is true, and you just don't want to say it.
Maybe I'll get to it after I've said some other things.
Yeah, I know you're going to say that as an individual, you have to critique your own side. Whatever, that's great. Yes, would you say the same about a Haitian slave who was critiquing the methods of the Haitian slaves against the French slavers? Would you say the same about a black South African who just did nothing but critique the anti-apartheid movement rather than the actual oppressors? Would you say the same about them?
These are quite different scenarios, and
they're not quite different scenarios, especially South Africa. Israel is worse than South Africa, far worse. Not even close.
I do not agree. There are 2 million equal citizen Arab Israelis. Okay. If you want to talk about apartheid, you can talk about Algeria.
I have a friend, an Argentine friend who is a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Would you like me to call him and you can talk to him about this?
If you want to bring someone else in, but let me answer your question the best way I can, please.
Okay.
I think from my perspective, I think it is the onus on ending this conflict and diffusing the hatred is on all of us as human beings, and I'm going to take responsibility to critique both the Israeli and the Palestinian side. And I think Israelis need to stand up to their own government and critique the Israeli side and to stand up for peace so that we can create the conditions to make peace. And in terms of power dynamics and power relations, which is what you wanted me to talk about, I absolutely will talk about it. Israel is a superpower. Of course, there's more onus on Israel. Nobody's going to claim that. And if you say I can't claim that, that's ridiculous. Israel is a military superpower. Israel is a technological powerhouse. Of course, there's a huge onus on Israelis to be rational, to be humane, to be
so question
decent.
Here. How is it that you basically talk so much about Hamas, about Islamic Jihad, etc., when you just acknowledge that the reason that these groups even exist, the reason that Palestinian children are growing up to turn 18, 19, 20 and joining these groups to go and fight Israel is because of what Israel has done to them? How I do you acknowledge that? And then you just keep talking and criticizing them? Because the way that you stop that from happening is through changing Israel's behavior.
I think maybe we do disagree a little bit about this, because I would say that there is a huge ideological component to this, right? When ISIS was rampaging across Syria and Iraq, there was no Israeli occupation there. There's no Israeli occupation in Sudan.
Hamas is not ISIS. No Hamas is nothing even close to ISIS.
No, they're not. They're not the same. They're not exactly the same,
and
right?
ISIS existed due to the complete destruction of Iraq and then Syria, which in Iraq was obviously the fault of the West. Syria partly so, but obviously not mostly. So we also have context there as to how ISIS came to be.
If we think about the origins of the Hamas ideology, they're part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was from Qutb, who was an Egyptian, right? And this is an ideological thing. And the ideological endpoint for Hamas is not free Palestine from the river to the sea. The ideological endpoint for Hamas is building Islamic globalism, because they want a global Islamist
You can talk about the ideological endpoint of Hamas whatever you want. Obviously, that's never going to happen. They've never even said, oh, we want the entire world to be Muslim or whatever. Hamas is primarily a resistance group. They might be a brutal resistance group. They might be a resistance group that kills civilians, whatever you want to call them. They're a resistance group that has popped up in the context of what is a war on their people, a 75-year-long war on their people. Regardless of what you think about how bad their ideology is, which I would agree with you. Obviously, I don't want there to be, an Islamic state in Palestine or whatever. But they exist in a certain context, okay? And the reason they exist in this context is because of what Israel has done to them. And Hamas has millions of times over expressed willingness to compromise. As much as you think they are like ISIS or whatever, they have expressed willingness to compromise. In that revised charter, they acknowledge that they would accept the 1967, a two-state solution on the 1967 borders, because they acknowledge that they think most Palestinians would accept that. So we're not talking about ISIS. We're not talking about an uncompromising global caliphate. We're not talking about Hamas, becoming a political party in a one state and trying to take over and then trying to take over the world through global Islamism. We're talking about a resistance group with aspirations that, as of right now, are clearly primarily directed towards their own situation. So I don't think you can fearmonger.
Right now, I agree.
Theoretical global Islamic caliphate's solution.
Right now, I agree that political stances are predominantly aimed at the current situation in Palestine. But I'm talking to a more global kind of system of problems, because it's not just Palestine that has problems with radicals. It's not just Palestine. It's Iraq. It's Syria. It's Sudan. It's Chad. It's Nigeria. It's across the entire world. Right?
Most of the countries that you mentioned basically have offshoots of ISIS. For one, they're not similar to Hamas at all. And for two, obviously the entire reason why these offshoots exist is a consequence of the Western invasion of Iraq. For one, these are not analogous situations. The Palestinian struggle long predates these groups, long predates ISIS. It has gone through phases of secularity, of Islamists now, and it's been largely the same throughout, really, regardless of the ideology of whoever the most powerful factions happens to be at the time. And I don't think that you can just point to Hamas and their ideology and fearmonger about them when we have a constant here, a 75-year-long constant, that regardless of the ideology of whichever Palestinian group happened to be the most influential at the time, has pretty much been the same. Israel oppresses them. Israel settles their land, Israel colonizes them, Israel periodically attacks them, Israel evicts people from their houses, whatever. And these different sorts of Palestinian ideologies exist as a reaction to that, primarily, regardless of what they are, regardless of where they're taking their inspiration from.
Is Hamas's strategy working for Palestinians? And that's, again, if you want to talk about why I take the stances I do, this is a major component of that.
Okay.
I don't think what Hamas is doing is working for Palestinians.
Did the Warsaw Ghetto uprising work for Jews in Poland? Because all that it did was cause reprisals.
Not particularly.
It got a bunch of them killed. But
did Jews in Poland have any realistic prospect for negotiating a two-state solution to where they could live freely?
No.
No, of course they didn't.
Do Palestinians have a realistic prospect? Okay, how?
We have to come to the table. We have to use our international connections, because most of the world does want to see this conflict being resolved, right? The EU, the UK,
okay, conflict
the
resolution.
USA.
Can we ask what does that mean?
Conflict resolution.
What does that mean?
Means
on whose terms?
Sitting down, talking about legitimate grievances between each other, right? And coming to some sort of conclusion about how we can fix the problems that are ailing us, both for Israelis and for Palestinians, and so we can coexist peacefully.
So first problem, Israel doesn't want that, has never wanted that. Through its behavior has always shown that it does not want that. The Israeli two-state solution has always been a massive concession on the part of the Palestinians. For example, they never include a right of return. They always demand a completely demilitarized Palestine, no military. They always ask
we don't need a military.
Seriously, Palestine, with everything that's happened to it, with all the attacks on it by Israel, does not need a military.
We could have international peacekeepers. That's
an occupation. That's not an independent country. That is a country that is occupied by the UN. That is not at all an independent Palestinian state, and this is specifically what I'm talking about. You can't.
There are plenty of demilitarized countries.
You cannot talk about a two-state solution and then just have one of these countries have no right to the very basic facets of being a sovereign state.
I don't want militants to take over again like they did in Gaza and start another war.
You have militants in power in Israel. Israel is a militant terrorist state. It's basically Starship Troopers in real life. How is that okay? Why shouldn't Israel also be demilitarized?
Why shouldn't Israel also be demilitarized? Because I'm trying to negotiate in a realistic... is that realistic? I don't think it is.
Oh, so it's realistic to de-arm the Palestinians, so that makes it morally okay. It's not realistic to de-arm the Israelis, so that makes it morally wrong.
I think international peacekeepers could do a completely reasonable job of looking after Palestinians.
They could also do a completely reasonable job of looking after Israelis, yet only one side has to make this concession. Do you see how your solution is not actually a solution? It is a solution in Israeli terms.
We lost the 1948 war, right?
And this is a might makes right argument.
We're not. Well, it's a realism argument because we're not in a position to be making demands for remilitarization.
Do you think, okay, let's say the Nazis conquered all of Poland or their half of Poland or whatever in 1945, and they stopped. And eventually they made peace with everyone who declared war on them, blah, blah, blah. Do you think that the Polish people who were against the Nazi occupation would have no right to fight back against it, would have to accept German Nazi terms?
No, I don't agree with comparing Nazi Germany to Israel, as you know, because it's defined under the IHRA as anti-Semitism.
Okay,
it is an anti-Semitic comparison. I don't think
that a Zionist activist organization defining something as anti-Semitism makes it objectively anti-Semitic. We can ask the question: are there similarities between these two countries? Okay, do you know what a Volkish state is?
It's a Nazi.
No, it predates
Nazi term for sure.
It is a term.
Go on, explain it to me.
It is a term to describe a state that is basically made for the benefit of one ethnicity at the cost of others, which might manifest in different ways with different levels of severity. However, that is basically what it means. Both of these countries are Volkish states. Absolutely, you can't deny that. Israel is a state that primarily exists to benefit Jews at the cost of everyone else. Okay? Nazi Germany was as well. Both of these countries are ethno-nationalist projects of racial supremacy. Both of them are colonialist, as I'm sure you know.
Is Palestine not ethno-nationalist? Is Hamas not a Muslim ethno-nationalist?
Not at all.
Project?
Palestine is a nationality. Palestine is a nationality. Okay, there are black Palestinians, there are African Palestinians, there are white Palestinians.
There are black and African Israelis. There are black and African Israelis.
Sure, except there is a definition here of race, of ethnicity,
Palestinian Israelis
itself. Which Israel, there are not Palestinian Israelis.
Yes, there absolutely are.
There are Palestinians in Israel. This is not the same thing, okay? These are different things. You're imposing this. For one, okay, in Israel, there's no such thing as an Israeli national. Declared by the Supreme Court, Israeli nationality does not exist, and the reason why they said that is because they want people to identify as Jews.
Okay. Get an Israeli passport, I'd say that's Israeli nationality.
Well, the Israeli state does not agree
Some of my family members have Israeli nationality.
The Israeli state says that you're not allowed to call yourself an Israeli on your ID card. You have to identify as a Jew, as a national Jew, because they believe that Judaism is a nationality. Okay? That's why. Because they don't want people to start having this sort of de-Judaize nationality of like Israeli, because they see that as more neutral. So that's their own issue, okay? That's what Israel says, okay? So clearly, Israel is very uncomfortable about some sort of neutral sort of Israeli nationality existing. As far as they're concerned, it officially doesn't exist. Israeli for them is a citizenship. It's not actually a nationality or an ethnicity. And that is a fact. Now, I disagree with that.
I think there's reasonable debates among Israelis about these topics, right? Not everyone...
I'm not talking about debates. I'm talking about official state policy. And
you're trying to paint it as a monolith.
I'm talking about the official state policy of the Israeli state. I don't care what anyone else thinks about this. I'm just talking about state policy, and that is what the state policy is, okay? The official state policy of Israel is there's no such thing as an Israeli. That is a fact. It's declared into law by the Supreme Court, by a precedent that has since been used to deny people identifying as Israeli on official documents. That's a fact.
I mean, I know people who identify as Palestinian but have an Israeli passport. So if you can't be an Israeli national, that seems a bit weird.
Okay, great. Except what I'm telling you is the official policy of the Israeli state. I don't think Palestine has an official policy where those people would not be allowed to call themselves Palestinians or anything like that. In fact,
how many Jews live in Gaza? How many Jews live in Gaza?
Who cares about how many Jews live in Gaza? I don't see how this is relevant.
Right. How many Jews live in Algeria? Right.
Who cares?
There are lots of ethno-nationalist projects.
How is Algeria? What ethnicity? What ethnicity we talk? What ethnicity is Algeria for? How is Algeria an ethno-nationalist project? Which ethnicity is it for?
It defines itself as a Muslim state, and only Muslims can be
Muslim in
citizens
ethnicity.
of it, as far as it is technically, yes, because it's passed down from patrilineally, right?
Anyone can convert to become a Muslim. If no one considers Islam to be
anyone can convert to become a Jew. Anyone can convert to become a Jew, right? I can go to the synagogue and I can hang out.
Israel. Here is the difference. Algeria defines a Muslim religiously. Okay, Israel defines Jew as a nationality, meaning even if you are secular, even if your parent was secular, you are still Jewish. Israel is a country that is ruled by secular Jews and always has been. Okay, so when you say
if I wanted to, I could go to the synagogue. I could convert to Judaism, right?
Great.
I could get Israeli nationality.
Great,
my kids could be secular Jews running the state of Israel.
Fantastic.
Right? So it is a nationality.
It doesn't matter. It's clearly not. It's clearly
anyone can be.
You're talking about
anyone can be
Israeli,
Israeli,
right? Like we were talking.
If they convert to Judaism.
No, for example, if I convert to Judaism, they would not let me migrate to Israel. It depends on who you are.
I think they would.
What happens if a Palestinian?
I think they'd have to.
What happens if a Palestinian converts to Judaism? Are they allowed to migrate to Israel?
I think it's made very difficult for Palestinians to convert to Judaism, which is
officially illegal.
I don't believe so. Actually, I think I could go and convert. I think I could.
Are you a Palestinian?
By the PLO law, I am Palestinian.
I'll bring you a source on this. If you are a Palestinian, you are factually not allowed to convert. I sourced this in one of my previous videos.
Okay. Well, I'm open to the information if that's correct, because that to me that seems like a very unfair policy. That seems like a very unfair policy.
Exactly.
If Palestinians cannot convert, because I know Israelis who are kind of on the fringes who have kind of grandiose ideas of why don't we convert all the Palestinians to Judaism and then we'll have a unified Jewish state, right?
So there are people about official Israeli policy.
Right. But again, Israel is not necessarily a monolith, and there's plenty of room for reasonable criticism of Israeli policy without stretching out into anti-Zionism, which is the topic that we started off with. Which I think I do not agree with anti-Zionism. I think we need to make peace with Zionism.
Great. Hold on, I'm getting the source for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here you go. Times of Israel. Rabbi heading the government's conversion authority says any such applications are thrown out without even being considered.
Right, and this is one specific rabbi at one specific point in Israeli history, and I don't agree with that policy.
The head of the conversion authority. He's an official Israeli government official who decides if your conversion to make aliyah is accepted or not. The threshold requirements to be considered by the Special Cases Panel are that applicants be sincere, that they are not foreign workers, infiltrators, Palestinian, or illegally in the country. That's another great thing. If you're like a Thai, worker in Israel, you can't convert and get Israeli nationality because they want you to stay there. It doesn't sound quite as exclusive as I thought. So it sounds like they're specifically trying to exclude Palestinians from Israeli nationality. Would you say that is a fair assessment of the evidence?
Based upon this article and based upon these officials, I would say that at that point in time that is a fair assessment of the evidence, right?
Okay, so in Algeria, if a Jew made a sincere conversion to Islam, do you think they'd be allowed to live there?
A conversion to Islam,
Mm-hmm.
most probably they would.
Okay, then clearly we have here an ethno-state, which makes exclusion based on ethnicity, and then we have a religious state, which makes exclusions based on religion. These are not the same thing.
Neither of those things. I don't think either of those things are what I would want to aim for.
Okay, it
right?
doesn't matter if they're what you want to aim for or not. We're talking. What I'm saying is that different. They're not the same. Israel is an ethno state, while we could say that Algeria is a religious state.
So when we say Palestinian citizens of Israel, there are 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel.
Palestinian of Israel does not actually mean Israeli, for one, and these Palestinians of Israel live under apartheid. If you want, I could go over the apartheid laws for you.
I don't think it's quite as simple as saying that it's apartheid within Israel against Israeli citizens. I think you could make a more convincing case about there being a similarity with apartheid in the West Bank, right? Because of the separate roads and the fact that the Israeli settlers vote in the Knesset.
I would like to just say that most of the important international human rights organizations do consider there to be apartheid both in Israel itself and in the West Bank, and obviously in Gaza as well. So
I mean, they left Gaza, so there were no Jews, Israelis to have apartheid with.
There were no white South Africans in the Bantustans.
There were, but Gaza was supposed to be a different. It was supposed to be becoming a different country. The Bantustans were not a different country, right?
The Bantustans were different countries, and South Africans who lived in the Bantustans were denied South African citizenship.
I mean, I don't agree with apartheid. I think it's wonderful.
Okay, great. But what I'm saying here, that's great. That's not what
anymore.
I'm saying. I'm drawing a comparison between Gaza and the Bantustans, which is really a one-to-one comparison that is pretty much inarguable, because we have something that is subjected, totally surrounded by Israeli authority, where Israel decides what gets in, what gets out, etc., etc. People inside are periodically attacked, whatever. Not even the Bantustans had that last part, by the way, though. So the Bantustans were exactly like that. People who were basically subject to the rule of the South African government, while not officially being subject to it, or being confined to a small area based on their race. Same idea.
As Palestinians, in Gaza, they're in a disastrous position, and we need to change things, and we need to negotiate peacefully to improve our situation.
Okay, so you can keep these platitudes that I've noticed you revert to, right? But I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's like a Bantustan. I'm drawing this comparison to apartheid South Africa.
It's not a completely incorrect comparison. It's not a completely incorrect comparison. I'm saying, okay, you want to make that comparison, go ahead. I don't think that actually that solves the problem that we have here, which is the long-term conflict and a need for a solution to that conflict. And waving around these terms like apartheid and ethnic cleansing and genocide, right? It's not going to solve the problem.
What if these terms actually apply to the situation? What if they do? Then would it be okay for us to use these terms?
Some people think they do, but I want to be realistic, and I want to talk about solutions that will actually get us to a state where Palestinians have self-determination and peace. That's what I'm about.
So do you think that using correct terminology for what Israel does to Palestinians could help us to achieve that?
I think that sitting down and having a negotiated peace process is what?
Here's my position on that, okay? If you don't call what's happening by what it actually is, you're just, for some reason, like letting the oppressor police your tone. That doesn't really seem like a productive sort of way to advocate for this, right? Like, what if apartheid South Africa was obviously racist? What if because the white South Africans who led that state didn't like it, we just decided not to call it racist because that made them feel a little bit bad? Does that make sense to you?
I don't think we should be arguing about whether or not we should be who should be getting tone policed. I think we should be taking pragmatic steps to improve the situation for everyone.
Okay,
that's what I want to do. I completely
agree. However, I think that if we're not calling a spade, we're not going to get anywhere near those pragmatic steps to make the situation better for anyone. We're not going to get anywhere near them. If there is genocide and we don't call it that, if there's ethnic cleansing and we don't call it that, I couldn't imagine you in any other situation saying that we shouldn't call a genocide a genocide. Now, maybe you don't think it's a genocide, but that wasn't your argument.
We should call a spade, yeah. But again, these analogies don't necessarily apply 100%. And oftentimes, even when they do apply, they are the result of reverse attacks by groups like Hamas, right? And
Okay,
the
so
Israeli security situation is obsessed with stopping Hamas blowing up buses.
okay, great. Let's say this is true. Are you familiar with the UN Genocide Convention?
I've looked at it a few times in the last few weeks. Yeah.
Is there any part in the Genocide Convention that says you get to do a genocide if they attack you first?
No, there's not.
Great.
But I would describe what's happening right now in Gaza as a war started by Hamas. That's my position.
Okay, that's your position. Is it a relevant legal position? If you'd like to, we could go over the case law and we could look at it to decide if it's a genocide or not. Does that sound good to you?
Let's get it up.
Okay, great. No problem. So if we look at the Rome Statute, which is where genocide is actually defined in international law. Sorry, it's 1998. I'll link it to you, and we can look at the definition of genocide in that. So Article 6 is where genocide is defined in international law of the Rome Statute.
Article 6, I've got it. I've actually got the document open.
Yeah, no problem.
Possibly.
So you're probably familiar with this already, right? This is just taken from the Genocide Convention, word for word.
Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Article 6. For the purpose of this statute, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily harm or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So do you know why I would say that the war between Israel and Hamas does not meet this definition?
Okay, why?
Because it's not committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. It's a war against the terrorist
We can
group.
look at that. We can look at that first. Okay, so there are two different factors of this intent. One, we could look at Israeli government statements. Two, we could look at the case law to establish intent via action, which is how usually genocide is actually prosecuted. You don't actually look at statements that are made, rather you infer intent from a repetitive pattern of action. So I'd prefer to go with that, but we can also look at statements of genocidal intent made by government officials.
I'm not going to defend any of them. I know
but the thing is, if high government officials are making
statements,
if high government officials are making statements of genocidal intent, that is clear genocidal intent. You can't argue not. Now, generally in international law, you can't use individual statements of intent to prosecute a state, but you can use individual statements of intent to prosecute individuals. So, for example, you could prosecute Netanyahu or any of his ministers easily of genocide in the court. Any of his high-ranking military officers, you could easily prosecute them for genocide. They're well beyond any reasonable standard in the case law.
I think what stands is the official case that it's a war against Hamas. I don't think
it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter what they say. The Serbs said that Srebrenica was a war against Turkish terrorists. Does that mean that's what it was? No. What matters are the facts on the ground. What are the facts on the ground? Well, the facts on the ground is that Israel is... I'm not sure if you've seen the article in 978 magazine or whatever it is, 972 magazine, an Israeli magazine. Okay, did you see the article from there? I'm sure you did.
Are you talking about the AI?
The article about that Israel knows who is in every single building that they are targeting. They know specifically who's in every building that they're targeting, and they know who they're going to kill if they target it. If there's a Hamas militant inside, they know that they're going to kill, let's say, 20 civilians if they attack that building.
It's very difficult to get that right. It's very, very difficult. I mean, I'm not an expert on
military tactics. It doesn't matter if they get it right.
It's very difficult to get that right.
It doesn't matter if they get it right. What matters is the law. What matters is the law.
It's very difficult to fight a war. Fighting a war is very, very difficult.
What matters, it doesn't matter if it's difficult, okay? What matters is the law. And what does the case law say about this? Well, we can go over the case law regarding inferred genocidal intent based on a pattern of action. So let's do that.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hold on. I'm just bringing up the source for this.
I think it's also important to stipulate that the war isn't finished. The evidence isn't all gathered.
Great. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because in genocide is an action. It is not a result. That's legally, genocide is an action. It's not like murder. It's defined by action. It doesn't matter what happens. Genocide, like, no one can die, and it's still legally a genocide. That's something that's very important.
If there is evidence for genocide, it needs to be gathered. It needs to be put together, and there needs to be a case put together, right?
Right.
That will
never happen because obviously no one's ever going to take Israel to court over genocide. All the allies would never allow it to happen. Israel's not even a member of the International Criminal Court. Simply not going to happen. But what I'm saying here is that we can make a case for genocide already, a very strong case. So
people make arguments. There are experts on both sides who claim my case and who claim your case, right? That it's not as clear cut as you're making it out to be.
It is really clear cut. We can look at the case law for this, okay? So in the Srebrenica trial, there was a precedent established referring to a pattern of conduct. A pattern. This is the non-accidental repetition of similar criminal conduct on a regular basis. Now, one of these actions would be a war crime, but these actions, in a pattern of conduct, say doing the same thing 50 times with the same result, that could infer genocidal intent, and it could be an act of genocide. And then there's another important precedent established during the Rwanda Genocide Tribunal, which stipulated that the offender is culpable because he knew or should have known that the act committed would destroy, in whole or in part, a group. Okay? So Israel has a repetitive
You think that October 7th was a genocide?
No, absolutely not.
Why was it not a genocide when they were deliberately trying to destroy, in part, Jewish people and Israeli people?
Is it a pattern of conduct?
Absolutely, it was a pattern of conduct.
Are they making the exact same attack over and over again and doing the exact same thing over and over again?
Yes, and there's specific evidence of Hamas leaders saying they're going to do it again and again.
They can say they're going to do it again. No, actually, no, that is a fake quote. It is. What you're doing is that quote, by the way, because the man who supposedly made that quote,
Musa Abu Marzouk and this Ismail Haniyeh, both of them, not just Sinwar.
You can say whatever you want about it. You can say whatever you want about it. Is there a pattern of conduct? Have they repeated the same
Absolutely.
attack? Have they repeated October 7 multiple times and done the same thing multiple times? We can go over the facts of October 7 after. But first, let me finish, okay? The offender is culpable because he knew or should have known that the act committed would destroy, in whole or in part, a group, okay?
So, October the 7th was a genocidal attack.
No.
Whereas Israel's response is a war.
We are not done yet. Because in the appeals chamber, okay, the Srebrenica tribunal then added further evidence of genocidal intent, right? How did they establish genocidal intent? Well, it was through the destruction of the potential for life of Bosnians in Srebrenica, constituting the destruction of homes, killing and transfer combined. So transfer and destruction of homes are not genocidal acts on their own, but from them we can infer the intent of genocide, right? And from that, we can infer, right, the intent of Israel in the north of Gaza, very clearly going by the definitions set out in the case law of what constitutes inference and, what you can infer from intent, is precisely that. The destruction of the potential of Palestinian life, especially in North Gaza.
Do Israel not have a right to defend themselves against Hamas?
What the fuck sort of a response is that? It doesn't matter if they have a right to defend themselves or not. You could say, they're just defending themselves. Their actions constitute genocide according to international law regardless.
I think their actions constitute a war against Hamas.
There is no such thing as a defensive
with collateral
genocide.
damage. There's one civilian casualty is too many, right? I want every civilian.
This is not collateral damage because they have precision weapons. They know exactly how many people they are killing with every weapon. If you look at, say, a Hamas rocket attack, Hamas does not know what that is going to hit. It might hit a military target. It might hit a civilian target, right? Israel does know. They know right down to the names, the age of every single civilian victim, how many they're going to kill whenever they drop a bomb on an apartment building. That is what the 972. That's what the 972 article shows.
If it's genocide, why are they warning civilians, to leave the area and to leave the buildings?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Trying to create evacuation routes.
Great question.
It just doesn't wash.
Another legal precedent. We have another legal precedent set in the Rwanda tribunal regarding specifically this, because there were people who committed genocide, and they also helped the people who they were genociding in limited cases, and they were judged individually in the Rwanda tribunal regarding that. So one second, let me find that so I can quote it to you precisely. Hold on 1 second. I just have to bring up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so first thing is that the Rwanda tribunal determined regarding mitigating circumstances, meaning things like giving humanitarian aid or it being a defensive action, whatever you want. This is a key legal term that they use.
Go ahead.
So the Rwanda Tribunal Chamber stressed that the principle must always remain that the reduction of the penalty stemming from the application of mitigating circumstances must not in any way diminish the gravity of the offence. What that means in practical terms is that you can use mitigating circumstances to lower the sentence of an individual or say a compensation package against the state, whatever, but it does not diminish the acts that occurred. So the act would be exactly the same regardless of mitigating circumstances. Mitigating circumstances such as giving humanitarian aid to the group that you were genociding, such as warning some of them to leave the building before you blow it up.
Well, I appreciate this. This is all correct. Like what you're saying is correct case law, and I appreciate you bringing it out. But to me, at this point, based upon the current evidence that I can see, I don't think that there is intent to destroy the Palestinian people. I think that there is intent to fight a war against Hamas.
You're saying that in the face of many different declarations of genocidal intent vocalized by Israeli officials, as well as genocidal intent that can be inferred through the combination of transfer, the destruction of buildings, and the actual genocidal acts themselves, and a pattern of conduct that easily constitutes genocide if we look at the precedent of the Bosnian genocide.
But if it, you can cite that there are lots and lots of different things that have happened, but until we actually have a case in the law, right, where they present all of the evidence.
Yeah, you can say that all you want, but you know that's not going to happen because you know that Israel enjoys the protection of every single Western power. You know that Israel does not accept the jurisdiction of the ICC. It's the same as Serbia. The only reason why Serbians were able to be tried is because they lost the war. Is Israel going to lose the war and be taken before the ICC? No, it's never going to happen, obviously. So you can say that. You can say that that's the only standard you'll accept, but it's never going to happen. And you know that. So you're basically hiding behind that.
I would say that there's a major reason why Israel has such such support from the West, and a lot of it is because the West is incredibly sympathetic to the situation that Israel finds itself in. Right? This is not.
I don't care. This is all emotional. Like it's appeal to. This is what these people think. It's appeal to what I think. I'm arguing the facts. I don't care about that. I don't care what the majority of people in the West think. I don't care what Western politicians think. I don't really care what you think. What I care is an argument based on the facts as to what is occurring. And if we look at the facts, what is occurring easily has breached the threshold of genocide.
I think that Hamas must have known that this was going to happen. Before they attacked on October the 7th, they must have known that there was going to be a very, very, very severe retaliation.
It doesn't matter if they knew, because the onus of genocide is on the part of the people carrying it out. You don't get to do a genocide just because the other side thought that you might retaliate to it. You don't get to do a genocide just because you're retaliating. That's a mitigating circumstance, which is not accepted as a legal argument.
The bigger point from my point of view is that we shouldn't be having this war at all, right? We should have been looking for ways to avoid having wars like this.
Fantastic. You know what a great way to end this war would be? Abolishing the state of Israel.
For Hamas to release the hostages and surrender.
So the onus is on a resistance group among the genocidal population to end this war, right? Why don't we instead?
That would do it.
I'm not talking about practicality. I'm talking morally. How about to end the war? How about to end the war? Everyone sanctions the ever-loving shit out of Israel and withdraws all military aid from them, sends their ambassadors home, whatever it takes to force them into coming to some sort of agreement to end the war that could then be used to eventually perhaps lead to a more lasting solution. Wouldn't that be a much more morally just end to this?
I think the international community should apply pressure to Israel.
Okay, how should they do it? Should they sanction it? Should they boycott it?
I mean, the first step is talking, right? And talking to both Israelis and Palestinians.
We are well past the point of talking.
Of peace.
We are well past the point of talking.
About the importance of peace.
What we need is action. We don't just need talks. We need action. I notice here that you prescribe specific
talks
against Palestinians. Against Palestinians, you prescribe specific actions like destroy Hamas. Against Israelis, you just provide words. You want words. You want talks. Why don't we take specific action?
I don't necessarily. I don't. I mean, I think Hamas has destroyed itself. To be quite honest,
I don't care what Hamas has destroyed, because the victims of this war are not Hamas. The victims of this war are Palestinian civilians that Israel is calculating, right, as was reported by IDF whistleblowers in 972 magazine, which is an Israeli periodical. Israel knows who it is attacking every time they attack a building. They are clearly making the choice to kill Palestinians. It's not speculative. It's not speculative. We're supposed to believe that the world's most advanced military, they're just attacking buildings without knowing what the result will be.
I think knowing who is in a building and who isn't in a building is really, really difficult, especially when there are tunnel networks. I don't think
it's very difficult to do that at all. When what we're talking, for one important
war's messy, war's horrible.
One important point that I'd like to bring up here is that if a militant is off duty in his civilian home, unarmed, he does not count as a combatant. It is illegal under international law to kill him. So Israel killing a Hamas member in their private home with an airstrike is committing a war crime. Okay? That's one point in the first place. So it's not even a justification. Okay? Secondly, they aren't doing this. It's perfectly possible for them to do this, and they are doing it. They're using advanced technology. And the idea that Israel doesn't know, because the Palestinian population registry, by the way, is public. The UN has it in the Gaza population registry. It has address, ID card number, name, birth date, all of that stuff. Israel has access to that. So it's pretty fucking easy for them to know what civilians live in each building, because the only people who are going to be hiding where they live are going to be the militants anyway. So they know, even if we throw aside this new technology that they developed within the last 2 years or so, they clearly have access to that information. And what we see here in this article, which has since been confirmed as having authentic IOF whistleblower sources in outlets like The Guardian, is that they are doing this. They know, in overwhelming majority of cases, when they attack a civilian building, or at least a residential building, how many people live there, and they have assessed the possibility of those people dying and decided that it's worth it, decided that it's okay.
They've given civilians multiple opportunities to evacuate.
This is called forced removal. It's a war crime as well.
Is it forced removal for Ukrainian civilians to leave Ukraine?
It is actually forced. It is forced removal if the Russians tell Ukrainians that they have to evacuate.
War is horrible. War is horrible. We should be not having war because that. But if I was in a war zone, I would evacuate. We should be not having war.
This is fucking. It doesn't matter what you would do. The occupier is not allowed under international law to force people to evacuate. Okay, that's not allowed. They can tell them, they can advise them to, right? But what Israel does with that is an implicit threat. That's the correct thing to do. It is an implicit threat, right? Because they said, high Israeli military brass said that if you stay, we will not differentiate you from a combatant. We will assume that you were a terrorist, okay?
Hamas shouldn't have started this war. Hamas started a war on October 7th. They killed civilians in the most brutal ways imaginable. What did they expect Israel to do? What did they expect Israel to do?
Well, it doesn't matter what they expected Israel to do, because a genocide is a genocide regardless of what regardless of what preceded it. Genocide is genocide, even if you didn't attack first, which in this case is a ridiculous claim to make, because obviously we have 75 years of an Israeli war on Palestinians. Either way, even if that narrative of Hamas just attacking out of the blue, in a nonsensical, just like barbaric attack, whatever. Even if that is true, the Israeli response to genocide,
what you want. You want Israelis to give up Zionism, don't you?
Of course I do. Why wouldn't I?
Right.
I want Nazis. I would want Germans to give up Nazism too. I would want South Africans to give up apartheid. Who wouldn't?
But Zionism is about Jewish self-determination.
No, it's not. Zionism is a colonial. Zionism is and has always been a colonial movement based on Jews colonizing a certain area. It could have even been Uganda. It would have been the same, by the way. If it was Uganda, we'd just be talking about what they're doing for native people there. But it is a colonial movement. It was defined as a colonial movement by its founders, such as Theodore Herzl, for example, and it is fundamentally based around going to Palestine, colonizing it, finding some way to get rid of the people who were already there, taking.
I don't think that's inherent to it. Is getting rid of people. I think we
If
can
it's not
peacefully
inherent to
coexist.
it,
We can peacefully coexist.
I think we can look at. I think people can peacefully coexist too. However, we can say that people can peacefully coexist, and we can also say that history of Zionism, both in practice and in theory, shows that it has been always been based around this idea of the negation of Palestinians, the people who were there before, to the point that Israelis even deny the existence of the Palestinian nationality, of the Palestinian national movement.
Practically, to some extent, I agree with you. Right? I argue with Israelis all the time when they tell me, certain Israelis will tell me Palestinians need to go to Jordan. Right? I hear that all the time. I hear Israelis saying ridiculous things like that. I heard the ridiculous things, Distilat Barian said, which were certainly genocidal sounding. I actually don't think that she's in control of the military and she can effect a genocide, because she was saying insane stuff like dropping an atom bomb. But you said something completely nuts that I saw on Twitter, which is that the answer to the state of Israel is nuclear weapons and using them against Israel. Is that? Did you say that?
Have you ever heard of people who argue that the atomic bombing of Japan was justified because basically it was the only thing that could have made them surrender, their behavior warranted it, etc., etc. Ever heard that before?
Just like with Japan, a nuclear bomb is needed to stop Israel.
Exactly.
You stand by that?
Have you ever heard of some
argument?
Okay, I'm responding to. Have you ever heard of someone making a statement calling out the hypocrisy of other people to make a point about a different situation?
Sure.
Do you think maybe perhaps I wasn't saying that literally, and what I was saying was an allusion to those people who said that the atomic bombing of Japan was justified, to say that, well, by their logic, wouldn't the atomic bombing of Israel be justified?
Well,
because that is what it was.
If that's what you actually think, then that is a more, it's not as absurd a claim as I perhaps thought it might have been on the face of it. Right, but I would say that in the wider context of people committing genocide against each other and advocating for genocide against each other, it's probably a pretty unhelpful comparison still.
Okay, so let's say it's an unhelpful comparison. Let's say that even if I sincerely believe that Israel should be nuked, I'm an Australian guy. I'm not a government member of the Israeli government. People who said that Israel should nuke Gaza are Netanyahu, who said that you should do to Amalek what Amalek has done to you. A reference to the biblical genocide of Amalek. He is the Prime Minister of Israel. The Minister of Intelligence in the Israeli government, who outlined a plan for the complete forced removal of all Palestinians from Gaza, who, thus far, by the way, her plan has been implemented to the letter in Israeli conduct in Gaza. She is a government official. We have statements of genocidal intent, evidence of plans for genocide from Israeli government officials at the highest level. Now, what someone like me says about this is totally irrelevant. What some random Palestinian guy in the street says about this is totally irrelevant. What is relevant to the application of genocide or any sort of war crime, even something below genocide, but which nonetheless carries very similar sentences, is command responsibility. In Israel, we have all of this coming from people with command responsibility. So this is not at all comparable. If you want to focus on me and my supposed moral bankruptcy, great. I mean, it doesn't really make any point here. It was just something I saw that I thought was worth bringing to the table. But realistically, what we're going to see is the dismantlement of Hamas, and I would be extremely surprised if Palestinian civilians are not allowed back to their homes. And there will be an after the war, and hopefully we will get an opportunity to have a peace negotiation between a Palestinian delegation and the government of Israel, where we can finally put behind us the 75 years and more. I have relatives who died in the 1930s in Palestine. And yet, this is what you are now. You sully their memory, my friend. You are the very definition of an Uncle Tom. You are the very definition of a capo. You are not standing up for anything. You see a lucrative opportunity.
Negotiation.
You see a lucrative opportunity to exploit a tiny little facet of your identity, which you don't even speak Arabic. You're as Palestinian as I am Greek, and I'm not Greek at all. You see an opportunity to exploit this tiny little facet of your identity for monetary gain, because
it's not monetary gain. I haven't made any money off this. I haven't made any money of this.
You know how incredibly desperate the Israelis are to find Palestinians, these tiny little minority of individual Palestinians who will say things that benefit them, and you have taken that opportunity, and this is what you are now, sitting here on live, every single question, every single statement of the facts, your response is, oh, I'm against war, or I'm against Hamas. You just ignore the facts on the ground, and you know why? Because Zionist propagandists cannot deal with facts. Zionist propagandists have to instead divert to other things. Never assume that a Zionist does not know the absurdity of his arguments. He does. The Zionist does not seek. The Zionist does not seek to convince with sound argument. He does not seek to establish facts or to argue based on the facts. He seeks to form a justification for genocide, and that is what you do. You are a disgusting pig. And I am glad you came on here so they could completely destroy you and make like thousands of dollars off it as well. Goodbye, my friend. This man is going to regret this for the rest of his life. It's absolutely ridiculous that every single time I say something, and this is a pattern that I've noticed with Zionists in general, they always don't deal with the facts. They're like, I can't make a pronouncement on that. I can't respond to that. Well, they're happy to make pronouncements for Palestinians. And all they do is like, oh, but I'm against war. I'm against war. I'm against bad things. I support good things. And the best way for us to get good things is for the Palestinians to completely capitulate and give everything to the Israelis. It's just like, his argument was basically that we should not call genocide because it might hurt the feelings of Israelis. I've never heard that argument in my life. Like, should we not have called the Holocaust genocide because it hurt the feelings of Nazis after the war, of Germans after the war? It's the same pattern always. I talk about facts in the ground. I talk about how these things meet the definitions for terms like genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, whatever. And the response is just some wishy-washy liberal shit like, I'm against all war. I just want to end all war no matter what. You ask these people, for example, should Ukraine give over all the Russian-occupied territory in order to end the war? They would say no. For Palestinians, they say yes. That is why when you ask them questions like that, their response is simply to revert to like, oh, I'm just against all war. I'm against all bad things. I support good things, because they can't deal with the actual facts. I literally just made a video about this, if some of you haven't watched it, about the weaponization of anti-Semitism. And the exact same patterns are seen there. The avoidance of the facts to instead just make platitudes, like proclamations that are just platitudes. Like, I'm against all war. I want peace for everyone. I love everyone. If you really loved everyone, you would support calling what Israel does by what it is. You would support doing everything to Israel to force them to stop what they do, as has been done in the past to a country like South Africa. When your solution to the Israeli oppression of Palestine is that Palestinians give up, that the onus is on the Palestinians to basically give their oppressors everything they want and stop claiming what is rightfully theirs, then you are obviously on the side of the Israelis. And it is fucking ridiculous that anyone pretends otherwise. Whenever anyone calls himself a peace activist, whenever they talk about peace, your first question should always be peace on whose terms? Anyone wants peace if they get what they want out of it. Hitler would have taken peace if all of the Jews and the Poles and the Slavs voluntarily moved to Africa. He would have been happy with that. So you have to ask, what does peace mean? In this case, peace for people like that means Palestinian surrender. That is how it is. Anyway, that's a good enough note to end on.